All right, well, I think I'm going to get started. I know that if you're popping in late, that you're welcome to join in. If anybody pops in and adds to the chat and somebody wants to answer, feel free. Uh, Thank you for joining us today, taking some time out of your afternoon. My name is Kimberly Samaniego, and I am the statewide director for MDTP. And I am co-hosted by my colleague, Emiliano Gomez, who will be taking half of the presentation with me today. So again, thanks for being here. We are all in our Zoom environments, and I know that we're probably zoomed out, and we have children and pets and cats to bomb us throughout. So we welcome the interactions and the challenges, and we'll just get started here pretty quick right now. So welcome, and let me get started. So as I move your faces from my view, there we go. Okay, again, I'm going to take the first part of today's session, and this is on equitable course enrollment policy. And so let me give you some perspective of my background experience. Prior to becoming the statewide director for MDTP, I worked in secondary schools. I'm a veteran secondary math teacher, taught high school and a year of middle school before transferring to UC San Diego. So I am now located in UC San Diego as a director of a statewide project. And Emiliano is my colleague, and Emiliano is the site director for the region of Berkeley. And so we all work to support MDTP in any way that's needed. We really thought this was a very timely session now because of the end of the year. We're wrapping up our year, but also the specific challenges and even opportunities that distance and remote learning provides. And we were hoping to give some insight about how you could use MDTP to help you inform your course enrollment policies. So without further ado, I'm just going to get started. And one more thing I wanted to add, and that is that at UC San Diego, I'm also the director of math testing and placement. So math testing and placement is definitely a really large piece of my my knowledge base. So I think that's one reason why I'm doing this here. Okay, so Karen, can you spotlight the video, please, and turn off other videos so that everybody's able to just focus on one. Sometimes if you go to speaker view up in your thumbnail, that helps. There you go. Thank you. All right, there we go. We told you in our flyer that we would talk about the California Mathematics Placement Act. So I started at UC San Diego as a director of MDTP in November 1st, 2015. This act was passed in October of 2015. And being an educator in San Diego Unified for 13 years, I used MDTP to inform my practice. I was thinking about the fact that I had a lot of tests that were paper tests at the time in my classroom, and that if they were used to support a placement act, that I needed to think about ways to use and measure maybe the same measure in two different ways. So this is what really prompts our session today. But the act itself states that all educational bodies, all institutions that bring in ninth grade students must have a fair, objective, and transparent placement policy for math. And this is to include two criteria. So there's two pieces to this. And the first piece was the reason that my phone at UC San Diego started ringing was there's a part in here where it talks about using multiple measures. And this is what this whole criteria first part is about. If you scroll in and look at some of those examples, placement tests pop up. So the phone was ringing and they're saying, we use MDTP, what tests can we use to support this act? And at that time, my thinking was we need to create another test. And we did. We created ninth grade assessments to help with this, which I'll talk about more towards the end of our session. So thinking about multiple measures is the first criteria. The second criteria of the act is that within the first month of school, students should have a checkpoint to make sure that their placement is correct. And in my opinion, in our MDTP world, I think we've done a very good job with this for the very long time. In other words, MDTP creates readiness tests to let teachers know when they get students into their classrooms what students know. That's what the point of a readiness test is. So And looking at how do we use MDTP, we really think that we can help support both of these criteria. The rationale for SB 359 is that we know math is very crucial for student success in college mathematics and also in STEM fields. Super important that they get that they have the access to mathematics. Specifically, what the bill states is that success hinges on their appropriate enrollment, and it's during middle through high school years. So appropriate enrollment means that we need to give them access so that they can get to the college level math courses and be successful there. Another part of this act is that they state that it's ninth grade is really crucial, that if we want students to be successful, they need to be in the appropriately placed math ninth grade course. And then the last, but in my opinion, the most important piece of this act is that there's a lot of evidence to show that students successfully complete an 8th grade algebra course and then move on to 9th grade and are asked to repeat that course again when they're successful. And this happens disproportionately with students of color. So what we're doing is we're hindering access for some populations of students. And this act is put in place to help us to provide access and open up equity. So I talked about the fact that we have an MDTP measure and we call them readiness tests in most cases. But during this time, we may need to use it for more than one purpose. So we may need to use an MDTP to help us think about course enrollment, and we may need to use an MDTP to talk about readiness. And we may use the same measure for 2 different purposes. So it's really important for us as educators to have a mindset about the purpose of the assessment. So we think about 3 things. We think about the type, the objective, and the consequence. So if we're looking at an assessment, a measure to inform course options, what should students take next fall, then we're really thinking about an assessment or a measure to be summative. We're going to give it one time, we're going to get feedback from that one time, and that's going to help us to make a decision. Okay. In a readiness assessment, which I talked about giving to students when they come into the fall, we're looking at it to be formative. We want to know what students know, and we want to use that information to help drive our instruction. So the objective of informing the summative measure is to see if students can succeed in the next level. It's really a yes or no question, right? And then the readiness objective is that we want to know what students know. We want to understand what they understand. We want to use it to build our practice and also to help inform our program and enhancement. Then the last piece is really important and something I think that we need to keep in mind, especially during this time of remote testing, is the outcome. So the outcome is high stakes for a summative assessment. Yes, no. That's basically what's happening. It's a yes or it's a no, high stakes. On the other end, a low stake assessment is when we're learning something and we're using it, and it's good for us and it's good for students. So we need to be mindful of these when we're thinking about the measure and the tool and what we're using it for. Okay, Emiliano, I'm going to pass off to you now. So
okay.
Take over here.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here or there, wherever you are. So, of course, we do have to consider that we are living in a bit of strange times of distance learning. And so under the current conditions, the testing that we can do is mostly remote. MDTP has actually developed a policy and agreement for using our tests remotely. And we also have developed some instructions for students. So all of our grade level and the course level diagnostics, those are so for middle school, we have tests that we call preparedness, tests of preparedness for grades 6 through 8. And then for high school, we have what we call course readiness tests, readiness for Algebra 1 or Geometry or Integrated Math 1 and so on the way through Calculus or Integrated Math 3. And those are all available in our readiness platform. We have another set of tests that are not available right now, which are the 9th grade assessments. So we're not going to talk about those today. Those require face-to-face proctoring. But all of the readiness tests and preparedness tests are ready. You can use them remotely. And so what we recommend is that you try to use them formatively to do a bunch of things that you can do. One of them is, of course, as you can see, these bullets, is understand what students, what are they getting, what are they not getting, what are some areas where there are misconceptions or gaps or weaknesses, and where are some areas where they really did get it, they're strong, they have this down. That can, of course, in turn inform your instruction and potential interventions. So you may find from the data that there may be some topics where you really want to focus your attention. And there may be, if there are some common mistakes or misconceptions, they may need to be addressed. You can also try to see, when you see how different students did on the test, if some differentiated activities could be prepared to help students with their particular needs. So you can group them according to what you think they need, for example. You can also inform next course, readiness, which is what we're going to talk about today, what we're talking about today, and also measure program growth. So how are we doing as a school? Are the results comparable from year to year? Things of that sort, okay? Are there any areas where we need to, how much are the students learning? Are there areas where students should be learning more? Things like that. And that in turn can lead into informing content for professional learning. So for example, discussions across grade levels, articulation to see how prepared the kids are coming into a certain grade level. Or another example, maybe some teachers are being really successful on certain topics, and then they may want to share with their colleagues, their magic, things of that sort. All right, can we click for the next one? Okay. So some recommendations that we have, if you're going to use testing, remotely, is that if possible, you should try to get some sort of a platform that allows you to proctor the testing. And that might be, there may be some legal issues there with student privacy and things like that. I know that I'm teaching in the math department at Cal, and we were not allowed to use Zoom to proctor students for our exams this semester. So there are certain issues that need to be addressed about that. But if it's possible, if you can proctor the tests, that's a good idea. And of course, as you will hear from us many times today, we really think that you should use multiple measures upon which to base your decisions about course enrollment. Something to take into account is that when the tests are taken in these current conditions, remotely, the validity and reliability of our tests, they are not necessarily as strong as they usually are in normal proctored face-to-face administrations. I'll talk a little bit more about validity and reliability later on, okay? And so again, this further suggests that you should use multiple measures to decide where students should be enrolling, okay? So the very first criterion is of SB 359 is to use fair, objective, and transparent measures, and you make sure to use multiple measures, and also that you apply the criteria for equitably for all, systematically for all students, so that you should not select subgroups of students and apply different criteria to them. You should apply the same criteria for everybody, okay? And we actually do have 6 guidelines that Kim is going to talk to you about to inform next course enrollment. So Kim, there you go.
Absolutely, thank you, Emiliano. Okay, so we have 6 guidelines that we're recommending, and this is to help you think about using MDTP for a placement tool. I use the P word. We're in MDTP world, we don't use the P word, so somebody has to charge me a quarter to put in the P jar. Basically, the first and the most important is to use multiple measures. Avoid using cut scores as a primary criterion for placement. There's a lot of reasons for this. I'll share an example in a minute, but one example from a district that I work with in Southern California is, and this was a middle school district who was looking for using MDTP is one of multiple measures for determining which students could be ready for an accelerated, compacted course of study. And so they used what they called multiple filters. So they had 3 prongs to the filter, and one was student achievement, where they looked at a course grade, an end of course exam score, so a final exam, and the MDTP, so the student achievement. The second prong was student effort and their work habits, so that's homework, attendance, and citizenship. And then the third prong was a teacher recommendation. So they determined that students who met 5 out of the 7 prongs on here on the filters were going to be recommended for this acceleration. Now the filters could be changed and should be adjusted as they see if it's equitably placed. Again, it's applied across all student populations, but this is just one example of using multiple measures. The second is that I get a lot of requests from schools and districts to inform them of a cut score. Like, what score should we use to determine if students are XYZ? MDTP, first of all, doesn't provide that. That is part of my, I believe it's guideline 5. I'll go over that with you. We do not provide guidelines for cut scores, but we recommend that you consider using the total score and topic scores, because MDTP tests are designed around foundational topics of mathematics that we have determined are necessary for success in a particular course. So again, avoid using cut scores as your primary criterion for placement. A Southern California district that's a high school district was looking for students that could be promoted into an advanced coursework in the 9th grade. I believe it was advanced algebra course. So here's an example of what they used in terms of how they used it combined here. They used the HS, the high school readiness test, which we've now replaced by the Algebra 1, Math 1 readiness test. And it's qualifying achievement is their main overarch umbrella. And so what they say, they have to meet at least one of the following. So 70% correct, so that, yes, that's a cut score, right? But there's an or. So or 3 out of 5 questions correct for integers, 2 out of 4 for exponents and square roots, and 3 out of 6 for linear equations and inequalities. So if a student met any one of these 2 pieces, they had qualifying achievement and were recommended for this placement. The second is near qualifying, and I really highly recommend that all schools and districts consider a near qualifying or a support qualifying, a qualifying for students that are very close to meeting the qualifying achievement. And so this is what they think, that if a student answered 3 questions out of 5 for integers correctly, or 3 questions out of 6 correctly for linear equations and inequalities, that they should be recommended for the program. I would also suggest that students in a near qualifying achievement category should be possibly supported through intervention in some way that you might determine based on need. Talk about that too. Guideline number 3 is to give students feedback. MDTP tests are accompanied by a PDF file with student letters around their topic performance. And I highly recommend that all teachers give these to their students with the information about what the testing means. In this case, we want the students to know how prepared they are for the coursework they're entering into. So this is what the letters are made for. Diagnostic feedback is an important process for any student, for students and for also all the educational pieces, the stakeholders. What are they learning and what do they know? That's the diagnostic feedback. So it's an important part to the process. And it also helps students to advocate and to learn about what they know, and what they need, what they're suggested to have review in prior to the coursework, so they could get they might engage in a summer tutoring program or in a summer program of intervention. When students have the feedback, they can advocate for themselves. One of the things I was going to tell you about a cut score is, and I forgot back in the criteria, is when I was teaching a pre-calculus class once, and it was my first year teaching at this particular school, the first week I gave the math analysis readiness test to my students. And at the end of the period of testing, one of the students came up and said, I don't think I did very well on the test. And I said, well, did you finish? Because that's the first thing I asked is, did you finish the test? She says, I didn't finish the test. And I said, okay, well, she says, but I really don't want you to cut me from the class. I really want this class. And I said, that's not what I use this for. This is for me to help design instruction for you. When I got the results back from the student, I found out the student had gotten 17 out of 45 correct. Somebody might, a colleague or a peer might say, well, that student's not ready for your class. But what I looked at next was another piece of data that said that student only finished 17 questions. So that told me is that student not only was very meticulous and absolutely 100% correct in the questions they answered, she would also need more time to finish testing, and also possible more time for homework. She got an A in my class, so we worked it out. So I just wanted to kind of keep that piece in there about the idea of a cut score tells you everything about a student performance. It really doesn't. We have a lot of diagnostic data to use. All right. Number 4 is to create supports and provide options. So this is when you are allowing students who are very close to meeting the cut score for the next level, but they're at the top of the lower level. So you might consider allowing them in and providing some support. For example, there's a lot of information about co-requisite coursework and how successful that is. Another thing that we do at UC San Diego is we use the diagnostic results to inform data-focused tutoring. So you could, looking at the topic-based results, you can create some topic-based sessions for your students. Another thing is, if you're allowing them to enroll, the other piece is, what about if the students who are at the low end of the cut score, they're in the next course, but they're at the low end, you're also allowing them to have some sort of support, because they're likely might need some intervention during your course to be successful. And then also, allow lower cut scores. If you provide the supports, you can have a little lower cut score, because you are you're providing for support for your students to be successful. So in effect, you are providing better access for your students. This is probably my second favorite, besides the multiple measures piece, is enlisting local experts. I think it's highly important to do this. There shouldn't be one person or 2, 3 people making decisions for an entire school or entire district about their policy on a measure. So local experts should sit down on a table and look at the measure, and all together they should be determining what the cut scores are. So they should, they also should be people who are who taught that course that students are exiting and are teaching the courses the students are entering into. So you have multiple levels in the room. What they should be doing is they should look at that measure one by one, should open up the test booklet and say, question number 1, do all students need to know this to be successful in wherever they're going? And it's yes or no. Question 2, yes or no? Yes. Question 3, yes or no? No, I don't think so, because I'm actually going to be instructing. I'm going to be bringing that up in the content. They're going to learn that content. Okay, cross off number 3. So you go by one each question of your measure, and you determine, is this something that students absolutely need to know, or is this something that we can cross off? After you've finished looking at all the questions, you can count up all the need to knows, and that is a basis for determining your first stab at a cut score. No pun intended on that. Okay, we also have a primer on setting cut scores from ETS, and it was written in 2006. It's really, if you love statistics, you're going to get your geek on here. It's a really informative piece. We'll have this on our website, as well as this presentation on the website, where you can click on that. It does have some recommendations of how to do that equitably for students. The last guideline is, and this is also so very important, something I do every year at UC San Diego with our measure for placement, is I need to know how well my measure is working for the purpose I'm putting in place for. So first of all, I look at the students who go to a certain course and then how they did in that course. So if I place a student into a calculus course, or a measure places them into a calculus course, or they place them into geometry course, or wherever students are going, at the end of that year, you need to take that student's grade and you need to look to see how they did by using your measure, how well your measure was to predict their success. This is really important. And then you need to adjust your policy based on your data. This has to happen annually. It really needs to happen every year you need to be measuring you need to be assessing your measure, right? Analyzing your data, making changes to your policy, and then doing it again. So you're always reflective. We do this process at UC San Diego every year. We did this process when I was in the high schools. Okay, I think that's the end of my piece. Now, I did forget something, and it arose while Emiliano was talking, is that we do have two moderators today I want to introduce, and that's Carol Treglio and Pat King. And they're going to be taking the questions from your chat, and they're going to be directing them to us when we finish. So Carol and Pat are both outreach facilitators in their regions for MDTP. You might know them in they have lots of hats around in mathematics around the state, but Carol's in San Diego and Pat is in Davis and all Northern California. So they're supporting teachers in those regions. So, okay, thanks, Emiliano. It's your turn. I'm passing you off.
All right. So we're going to talk about very superficially just a few things that you should probably keep in mind about cut scores, the statistical issues around it. Okay. So say that I'm your student and I take your test. And so I take the test, I get a 65%. All right. So then that is the score that you record on your grade sheet. That's what we call the observed score. All right. But maybe that day I had a really good night before and I was really focused and maybe I guessed a couple of questions and I got lucky and my score on most days would have been lower than that. So maybe my score, if I had taken it on most other days, would have been maybe 60 or even 55%. By the way, we always recommend if you can tell your students not to guess, because then you will get misinformation, basically. But on the other hand, maybe that day, maybe that morning my dog died, or I had a really bad night, or I got stuck on one problem and didn't manage the time correctly on the test, or I made a couple of mistakes that I usually don't make, or whatever may have happened. And if I had taken the test some other day, maybe my score could have been, most other days would have been higher. So what happens is that there is a true score that we don't really know. What we have is an observed score, and we can think of it as the true score plus some random error, which could be positive or negative. And we hope that that error is small. Okay? Can we go on? So when this leads into this concept of false negatives and false positives. When you're setting a cut score for a test, these are the two kinds of errors that happen. A false negative. So this is, for example, if you're setting a cut score to classify a student to say, okay, this student is going to go into this course. Okay. A false negative happens when the observed score, the score that the student gets on the test, is below the cut score, but the true score would be above the cutoff. Okay, so these students score below the cutoff, but on most days they would have scored above. And a false positive is the other way around. The observed score, the score that the student actually gets on the test, is higher than the cut score, but the true score would have been lower. And so the true score, you can think of the true score as the average of many, many different repeated administrations of the test under the same conditions, which of course we cannot do. Okay, so those are the two possible types of errors. Okay, can we go to the next? And so, especially when you have large data sets, it's not a question of if errors will happen. They will definitely happen. You will have errors, of this sort for a number of reasons. First of all, no test can be perfectly reliable or valid. These are two words that came up earlier. So reliability is a measure of consistency across time, test, retest, or across items. So items to internal consistency of a test. And it basically, it tells you that if you were, for example, to give the same test to a very large, very comparable set of two different, but very large, very comparable groups of students, you have similar histograms, similar measures of central tendency and spread. But validity is something else. It's a measure of accuracy. Does it really measure what you're trying to measure? And that, for that, it basically is a judgment call that you can base on different kinds of evidence, okay? And no test no matter how much effort you put into it, can be perfectly reliable or valid. In this case, for example, is it valid for placing students into a course? Plus, as we just saw, there is always some randomness in the scores that we cannot see, all right? And of course, we always have to keep in mind, and this is yet another reason why we always have to use multiple measures, that there will be a number of students near the cutoff, and the error for the chances that we're making an error for those students is, of course, higher. Okay? Can we move to the next slide? So what you can try to do is anticipate for these errors, which will happen. And so one of the first things that I think you have to do is just have a conversation at your schools and at your districts about the relative harm of these two types of errors. So for example, a school may think or find that they have a lot of false negatives. In that case, what's happening is that they are denying access to a course to a bunch of kids who maybe should be in that course, and that maybe closes some doors, opportunities to college or certain careers. And in practice, we know that tends to happen disproportionately more to certain minority groups or groups having certain characteristics of race or social economic status. On the other hand, if you might have also a school that thinks that they may be having a problem that they have too many false positives, and then that is causing the integrity of the course to suffer, or maybe many of the students are failing the class, and that has huge implications for their self-image and the expectations that they have for themselves and from others in the future, and the choices that they make. So these are both pretty serious, and you have to have a conversation about what's your policy going to be. All right. So, and then you might think about adjusting the cut scores. So you can try to adjust them up or down. So if you want to reduce the false negatives, then of course you just consider lowering the cut score. And if you want to reduce the false positives, then you want to raise the cut score. But you have to keep in mind that when you do either one of those things, you reduce one type of error, but you increase you're necessarily going to increase the other type. So that's something that's unavoidable. All right. And again, that's another reason why you should always look at multiple measures to get a better picture of each one of your students. That's not just a cut score. All right?
Excellent. All right, thank you so much. I'm going to close up the presentation piece of by letting you know that MDTP has an assessment system that is free to all California educators. We've been grant funded through CAP, California Academic Partnership Program, and to do this work. And we've been grant funded since 1984, and we'll still be grant funded even in this challenging time. So feel free to reach out. We have several things to offer in our system. We have the grade level assessments of preparedness that Emiliano had spoke of earlier, and this starts in 6th grade, so 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And then we also have course level readiness tests that begin in Algebra 1 or Integrated Math 1 and go through calculus readiness. We have 9th grade assessments to help with SB 359, which are not available right now during remote learning, but they will be available again as soon as we get to see our students, but we're back to face-to-face learning. Those need to be proctored in a face-to-face setting. There's some issues with the logistics of that platform that they have the time test and students can't get back in it, so we just turned that off, so there wasn't going to be unnecessary challenges to using those tests. So we recommend that you use the other two forms of assessments to meet your needs at this time. And we also have written response items that many teachers don't know. They are aligned to topics from our MDTP tests, and they are free. Everything you want to learn about us is at mdtp.ucsd.edu, which is our website. Feel free to look around at the website, and it provides information and also access if you would like to get access to testing or the response items. And at this point, will move us to our moderators to focus questions to Emiliano and myself, and they're going to be looking into the chat right now. So if you have some chat questions, and once they begin to ask questions, they're going to turn off their mutes, and we'll start that session now. Let's see everybody.
All right, Kim, I'll go ahead and start. This is Pat.
Hi, Pat.
Question that came up several times is, will you share the recording of today? How will it be shared? Could the link be emailed to participants?
So as everybody else, MDTP is challenged with this time. We are trying to be reflective in how we're presenting information. So this is our very first, I call it a Zoominar. We will have webinar next time, a webinar access, and I think it gives us a little bit more capacity. One of the issues is to make sure that the recording is not too big for us to house somewhere and also share. So we're looking at the logistics of recording being shared. We will definitely have the presentation on our website on the very home page. We'll be putting that up tomorrow morning, as well as the resources that I've referenced, the 6 guidelines and the ETS primer will be on the website on our home page. So yes, you can go there for these pieces. And if we can get, we're looking to make a video of our presentation today to post on our website also.
Hi, Kim. This is Carol.
Hi, Carol.
How can we assure the security of online testing and avoid the use of math apps during testing, such as PhotoMath, Math, etc.?
That's a really good question, and I think hopefully you've heard in several different ways that in these times when students are taking tests remotely, we cannot be absolutely sure that students are not using calculators, web-based apps. We recommend, trying to proctor with Zoom or a Google Hangout, knowing that this is also provides its own challenges. I think the number one thing is to make sure that it's one of multiple measures. I think also another really important piece here is that we didn't touch on. I'm surprised that I missed this piece. Students need to know why they're taking this test. So they need to know the purpose of the assessment. And if you put the purpose to be it's high stakes, then you are likely to invoke the more use of outside resources. So letting them know that the diagnostic results will be used to help you inform decisions around and give them XYZ, decisions around your potential enrollment options, decisions around our instruction, how we're doing as a team of teachers, as my students are exiting 8th grade, how we're doing. We want to look at the data for that. Around our next unit, so we're going to learn about data, what we're going to inform you with, what we're going to use to inform our next steps in instruction, so that students know that the data is used to help them and support them. And if they understand that, and if they have a trust about why the data is being used, then I think they're much more likely to take it with some integrity. We do allow students to take some tests at UC San Diego at home, unproctored, and I find the results to be very surprisingly and happily right in line. The student, when we let them know we're using the data to inform our instructional practice, they let us know what they know, and they also let us know what they need help with. So I think it's letting the students know what the purpose of the assessment is for, and multiple measures.
This is Pat, and the question is, for students who have taken 8th grade math and not algebra in 8th grade, should we interpret multiple measures differently?
Emiliano, you want to take this one? Or you?
Well, I'm not quite sure if we're talking about a student who is coming into a new high school where the teachers do not know the student. But if that's the case, what are the multiple measures that we're talking about here? Of course, some of them that are very important are teacher recommendations. What teachers know about the students, about their engagement in class, their participation, their growth. And so if this is a student that's coming into a high school, I would hope that there is some communication between the teachers who are the last teachers and the receiving teachers to make some of these evaluations. But I'm not sure if that's
I can add a little bit.
Was.
I can add a little bit too.
Yeah.
Students exiting 8th grade Common Core Math are going to be entering into the 9th grade course at whatever level that, generally it's an entry level course, depending on what the district has in place. So you're not looking to screen students away from, I use the word screening because I think that's a way to talk about narrowing options. You wouldn't want an MDTP to narrow options for students to taking that entry-level course. What you might want to do with it as a multiple measure is using it, and you're asking if there should be multiple measures, and absolutely there should be multiple measures. You can be looking at things like their attendances are really great. You know, their how they're doing in their homework, how they're doing in their efforts, and to, you know, what types of effort they put into a course. But when you're looking at the data from an MDTP, you might be thinking about what kind of intervention could we provide for students who might be in an entry-level course and who have very diverse learning needs. So that could be helping you to inform the types of supports that could be ongoing while students are accessing your entry-level course, instead of holding them back from that course.
Yeah, another thing that I would add to that is that one of the components of SB 359 is to do a checkpoint early on, pretty early on in the year.
Mm-hmm.
And that should be hopefully a diagnostic test that helps not only inform if the course is the appropriate course, but also what kind of help the students need. Like
Right,
Kim
that's
is
right.
saying.
That's right.
Hi, Kim. This is Carol.
Hi, Carol.
Does your online platform now support multiple testing times? For example, can we have a 2-week window to administer exams instead of a specific time to allow us to work with students' home schedules?
Absolutely, absolutely. That's one reason why we are not offering the 9th grade platform, because it's not flexible. The readiness platform really allows the students to take it over multiple dates. They can proctor test. They can have a proctored window when that test is available. But once students actually enter, I'm going to be Zoom bombed by my cat. Once, you can't see her, but you will in a second if she comes this way. Once the students enter the test, then that test will close that night, and you will need to go back in and proctor it again to get a new proctor code. The test unfortunately does shut down at 5:30. If you haven't entered it. So if a student enters the test at 5:20, it will not shut down on them. They can continue to take the test. But the readiness window allows multiple time. You just set up one class, enter all your students in, register them to one class, and then it may be that the proctor code might change, but those students will go into that same test and continue. They can take as many days as they need to test it. And working around, we know, sharing computers at home, sharing the time when they get quiet space. So we understand those challenges. So yes, it's a very flexible environment. And also open on the weekends, just not after 5 o'clock at night.
Okay, Kim, here's another question. This is Carol again. I'd like to know more about what you recommend for timing the test. How long should you give students?
Good question. Give them as long as they need. You know, I think that most of the MDTP tests are designed to be done in one class sitting. So a 60-minute, 45 to 60-minute period works well for some, but it doesn't work well for all students. When I taught 9th grade and an integrated Math 1 course, your students have test fatigue, especially when they're entering in the 9th grade and they're just coming to you. So you have to kind of build up that stamina. And at the time, we didn't have online testing because I wasn't the director yet. So we had booklets. I would tear the booklet in half and give students 20 questions one day and the second 20 the next day. With the online system, you can tell your students you're going to get 30 minutes today, and then you're going to get 30 minutes tomorrow, and then you can look to see if students need more time. It's really most important for the students to have the time to complete the assessment so that you know what they know. I don't think that assessment gives you much data if it's timed for less time than they need to be meaningfully engaged. And I say meaningfully engaged, so it doesn't want to extend it 2 to 3 hours. I think a very reasonable time for students is between 55 and 70 minutes for most students. Yeah.
One thing I would add to that is that in case you haven't used the online platform, when you receive your data, among that data, you will have timing data. And that will tell you for each of the questions on the test, both how much the entire class took on that question as an average, and also how much each of your students took on each of your questions. And that's interesting data when you're looking at engagement, or if you're looking at if there are particular problems that for some reason are being, they're long. It takes either most students or particular students a long time to answer.
That's right. So I think we'll take one or two more questions. I know we're a little over our time. I still see we have a good show of participants, so we won't leave you yet. If you have some questions that are burning that you want to answer, place them in the chat real quick. And then I also want to let you know that if we don't answer your questions, we are recording we are downloading the questions, and we'll be distributing them throughout the regions to respond to you. So Carol, Pat, do you have another question for us?
Yes, this is Pat. How are the assessment tests different from the readiness tests?
That's a good question, and that could take a little longer than a minute. But overall, the difference is they don't have any common items, although they have parallel concepts and skills. I'll put it that way. So we created them in parallel, but we wanted to make sure that they weren't any items that were exactly the same. The ninth grade assessments tend to, the assessment for eighth graders exiting eighth grade Common Core is skewed a little bit. The deltas is the difficulty of the test is skewed a little less on the delta. So we are not identifying a large group of students who may need a lot of intervention. What we're trying to do is provide good diagnostic data for decision making. The geometry readiness, or I should say the geometry assessment and the integrated second year assessment are skewed a little bit higher because we really want to know if the students have learned what they need to know from their eighth grade experience to be successful in that course. Not to say that it's much more difficult, because it's really not, but we have some items in there that are going to be able to help distinguish between a student who may need more intervention. Overall, the content is a little bit more focused on that eighth grade class rather than going back through several years of contents and standards. From the readiness test, they may go back all the way to third grade content and standards to bridge into an eighth grade or ninth grade course. But the those assessments are a little bit more focused on where the students just came from. So that purpose of being summative.
Also, there are some differences in, for example, like I think you mentioned, Kim, that the ninth grade assessments have to be taken in one shot, and
That's right.
They have to be proctored face-to-face, so they're not available right now. And the report that teachers get also has some differences, right?
That's correct. That's correct. Yes, we don't provide critical levels on those assessments because we do not want to be determining. We're not the guideline number 5, we're not the peers in the room, the experts in the room. The experts in the room should be determining what the students need to know. So we don't provide that. That's correct. How about one more? Pat, you have one?
I do, and it's probably a great exiting question. What are the pros and cons of using MDTP versus an in-house assessment for ninth grade placement in general, and also in particular this year? There's a way to close it.
So I'll just maybe start and then let Kim run with it, because I think she has a lot more to say than I do. One thing I would say is that MDTP's work group, which consists of about 30 people, it's a very, very serious group of people, and we take about 3 to 4 years to revise or write a test. A good part of that is because year after year we tweak the test, we do a lot of statistical analysis until we know that the items are good and that the test is as reliable and as valid as we can make it. This is one of the reasons why for us it's crucial, this is a plugin, to get teachers help when we're field testing, so that we can get those statistics and make the tests better. So our tests, all modesty apart, are very good tests.
Yes, they are. So running with that, the pro is that it has been validated. It is reliable. It's predictive. We have a lot of data to show that it is predictive of student success and student readiness for the courses that they're going into. So that's what our statistical analysis do. The tests that are created in-house may be a little bit more reflective about what a particular program is representing, right? Assessing what this particular school put in place, right? So in that aspect, there would be maybe some items that you would find on one measure or another that are a little bit, more in tuned. But the con I don't believe that's a con, I think it's a pro for MDTP, is that we do not create these tests by a checklist of, did it cover this, did it cover this? What we look at is a very holistic approach to what does a student need to be successful in a particular course. And we look at the framework for that course, and we analyze those standards very carefully to create our specifications for each test. So the content of the test is not aligned to a book or is not aligned to a curriculum. It's really aligned to what students need to know based on the framework of the course they're going into. So in that way, you're going to have a very stable assessment that is in tune to a framework, rather than having assessments that differ from place to place. So it would be one assessment that is looking at prerequisite skills and content knowledge needed to be successful in a particular course. So that's how we create our an MDTP test. So I believe that's a con. I mean, I'm sorry, a pro. Yeah. I think there's a lot of good reasons. It's easy. It's fast. You get the data instantly. It's free. And we have spent, as Emiliano said, we take a lot of time to design our tests that you don't need to do because we've done that. That's our work.
Yeah, and our data sets are thousands and thousands of students, so the statistics are actually robust.
That's correct. And we also have site directors like Emiliano, Pat, and Carol, who will go to your site and help you evaluate your results and think about how to use them for instructional shifts and changes and program improvement. That's part of our free resource. So we're not trying to sell anything because we don't make any money because it's free, but we do believe that I'm a strong believer in the product of MDTP, our resources, because of what Emiliano stated, and it's the validity of the work group that we put the time and the effort into creating the assessments and in the statistical analyses.
I should add that our work group has a good number of teachers in the secondary grades, and not just faculty from CSU and UC, but also a lot of teachers from high schools and middle schools.
That's correct. So each test has face validity of representative committee members. If we're for example, we're finishing up on our 6th grade math assessment of preparedness, and this is our 3rd year for this test, and the data looks great. So we're going to be able to release that this fall, which is really good news. We have in the room elementary educators that know what students need to know from grades from the kindergarten through 5th grade. We have in the room our 6th grade experts, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade experts, and we also have high school teachers in the room. So all of they are on the committee because they have a strong knowledge of the progression of mathematics that are needed and what are students' experiences, and also how do you pose a question to a student at this level based on their previous experience. So that face validity on an MDTP test is very valuable. Okay, I think we're going to close up now because I think it's the time to do this. We'd like to put on more seminars, info sessions, Zoominars in the future. And if you want to just type in the chat before you leave, what would you like to see in our next session? I know we have a lot of questions that we may not have answered just looking at the survey results. We'll try to get some information to you on that. But how to use data to inform instruction are something we always like to talk about. So we hope you found that this was a valuable use of your time, and if you have remaining questions, please add them to the chat, and we're happy to work with you on getting those answered. So thank you, Emiliano, Pat, Carol, for your help and your time today, and thank you everybody for being here, giving up a little piece of your educational day, and I hope that you stay well in this time and stay healthy and safe. And thank you. Emiliano?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for participating.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll end now. Take care.